So, given the skepticism and the mistrust that exists of public officials, especially elected officials, which exists in New York as well as the areas where you hear about the Tea Party movement and so on, why wouldn't it be fair to say, well, you're one of those guys. You were in office, you were an assemblyman, you get picked by the legislature, now you're a comptroller. Aren't you part of the problem rather than the solution?
I think people should just look at the record. I think it's very important to be an informed, voter. Look at what someone's done in a position. And certainly, I did a lot as a legislator and have done many very effective implementation of changes here at the Comptroller's office. I think one reason why people tend to hear not a lot about our office is we've not been part of the scandals and parts of the negative publicity that's come out of the state level in recent years. We've been part of turning things around. I just would ask people, look carefully at my record, look at what we've done, and compare my credentials and what I've done to whoever may be running against me. Make an informed choice. I'm very proud of the record that we have here, and I think that record will stand up in November. The challenge really is twofold. First of all, we have a legacy of not making the best choices on spending and aligning recurring spending with recurring revenues. And that's been a problem for a number of years. We seemed to get away with that a few years ago because Wall Street was making so much money that the revenues came in higher than expected.
So being flush covered a lot of sins.
So now you come to the recent times, and we have this great recession that's hit us very hard in New York. Again, largely because of Wall Street being off, but infecting the rest of the economy as well. So we have some of our structural budget gap issues that we haven't dealt with for a while, and we just have weak revenues generally, because although Wall Street's come back faster than people expected, it's not generating the revenues it did before, and the rest of the economy is still in bad shape. Unemployment very high, sales tax revenue down, people are afraid, they're not spending money. So I think the first challenge for us, as difficult as this is to be much more careful about spending. We've made commitments on spending in the past that we just haven't had the revenues to sustain. And last year's budget was put together.
But that's a recurring issue, that they keep voting for programs and quote funding programs for which there's no real solid fiscal foundation.
What often happens, David, is that there's money there in the short term, but there's not money there as the program grows out. So, you may start a program and you don't have the funding kick in until the third quarter of the fiscal year, but then the next year it's for a full year, but you don't have the adequate money there. So it means doing a much harder job of scrutinizing spending. When the current budget was put together, I criticized it as being overly optimistic on revenues and deferring the tough choices on spending, relying on federal stimulus money, on the tax increases. That stimulus money and those tax increases on income taxes are temporary in nature. That's why we have a recurring problem in the out years, even if we get through this current budget negotiation. We have a long-term problem. And taxes have been raised consistently over
New York State is one of the most heavily taxed states, and if not the most heavily taxed state in the union.
No matter how you look, when you accumulate what you pay in state taxes and local taxes, that's where you really get the big hit. If you take any one of the taxes separately, we may not look so bad. It's when you put it all together. So raising taxes, I don't think makes sense right now with the difficult economy that we have, and I don't think borrowing makes the most sense. We're also one of the most highly indebted states in our nation, again, because of past decisions. And some of that has been to borrow to pay for operating expenses, which is not what you should be doing. So that's why we're in a weak budget and fiscal condition. As hard as it is, we need to make tough choices. That's what New York families have been doing in the face of this great recession, making tough choices on spending. Government has to do the same.
It seems to be a truism, there's no way to get around the current serious financial crisis without making some drastic cuts. What do you believe has to be cut? You're running for office now. Mm-hmm. If you weren't running, maybe you could take a different position, but you are running for office. Yeah. What do you think needs to be cut in order to set the budget right?
Yeah. Keep in mind, as Comptroller, it's a different role than when I was a legislator.
No, I understand, but you're a statewide official.
No, absolutely. Yeah. So I need to do my job the right way, and my job is not to tell people what the choices are. That's why it gets back to what we talked about before. You have to know the priorities of the men and women who you vote for Senate and Assembly. Those are the people who make the budget choices. Looking at it in the broad stroke, as we look at it from our office, the biggest expense areas for New York State's budget are education and healthcare. That's just the reality.
That's
So-
what, about 70% of the budget?
Oh, in terms of the discretionary funding, those are the two big areas, and there's no way with a $9 billion gap like we have next year that you can solve that without having to be more careful about spending in those areas. So take healthcare as an example. One of our responsibilities is an oversight role, promoting accountability, making sure taxpayer money is being spent the right way, and we've spent a lot of time looking at the healthcare program, the Medicaid program. And we've identified on a regular basis opportunities to save tens of millions of dollars if they would be a more careful analysis of the claims in the Medicaid program. There are instances of fraud, of providers ripping off the system. We find that, the Attorney General finds that, the Medicaid Inspector General finds that. That's not a question of cutting a program or taking away services from people. That's just spending money and not wasting it.